when the time was right, and not before it was right. Because Jesus, of all people, the man Jesus, of all people, the Son of God, knew better than any of us that God's will outside of God's timing really isn't God's will. And so when the time had come, when God's timing was right, Jesus stepped onto the scene, giving hope to people. Remember that the day that Jesus lived in, the common folks really didn't have a lot of hope. They lived a very meager, hand-to-mouth, day-to-day existence, while the religious leaders tended to be wealthy. They had taken something so God-centered as the law of God, and God and other word-centered, and twisted it around until they were able to essentially satisfy themselves and live comfortably under the disguise or under the guise of being faithful. And not only did the common folks have that to deal with, commoners that believed in God and loved God, not only did they have that to deal with, but they also had to deal with the reality that they lived under the boot heel, if you will, the sandal heel of an oppressing empire, the Roman Empire, that demanded a lot. Every time the emperor needed a new summer home, he enacted more taxes upon the people. And it was into that kind of an environment that Jesus came. And he didn't waste any time stirring up a lot of commotion, good holy commotion. He went about all of Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every infirmity among the people. He was giving hope to people in concrete, tangible, seeable ways. And his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains, demoniacs, epileptics, and paralytics. And the scripture tells us that Jesus healed them all. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis and Jerusalem and Judea and from beyond the Jordan. My, what a sight that must have been. The excitement that you could sense, the electric excitement in the atmosphere everywhere that Jesus went. So much so that great crowds gathered around him. Great crowds followed him. They heard of the miracles and they flocked to the area where Jesus was at. And seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain. He went up on the mountain, on Mount Eremos. It is widely and generally accepted. And Mount Eremos isn't like a mountain that we think of when we think of mountains. We think of mountains with these tall peaks. Mount Eremos was essentially just a huge hill. And he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him, his students, those who wanted to learn from him. Some of those had already been called to be his apostles. Others were just everyday, ordinary people, commoners. And when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying. And there begins the Sermon on the Mount. I'm about to embark on a journey. A journey of knowing Jesus better than I've ever known him before. Striving to know him. Hungering to know him more intimately than ever. We're living in honestly a terrible time. People seem to be going about without hope. There's a lot of confusion. These COVID times, this COVID season has definitely brought out the best in some and the worst in some. And it's really interesting to watch the way it's playing out, especially in the lives of people that profess to be followers of Jesus, and yet they're reacting in all kinds of fear and anxiety and honestly exhibiting very little, in my opinion, of the kind of faith, the kind of hope that Jesus instills within those who know him intimately. And I want to know Jesus more intimately than I've ever known him before. And so for the next while, I don't know how long that while is, because it's going to take a while. So I just say for the next while, I'm going to be spending a lot of time with Jesus up on Mount Eremos. And the fruit of that is hopefully going to be conveyed, communicated in my blog at Oblate Offerings, as well as here on Salty Catholic. And I think about that mountainside. I think about how much room is there, and how Jesus is inviting us today in the 21st century to return to that mountainside, to return to Mount Eremos and listen carefully, listen intently with the ear of our heart to hear what he is saying to us in the 21st century. And I'll dare to say that he's saying the same thing to us now in the 21st century as he did to those beautiful, poor, hard-working, struggling, living day to day and hand-to-mouth commoners that gathered around him when he went up onto the mountain, sat down, and began to teach. I invite you to come with me, and let's explore the Sermon on the Mount